This is a continuation of my attempt to show you the fundamentals of Chansijing, which I think is possibly the most neglected thing in the Yang style. I think it was a very important integral part of the Yang style, and I attempt to teach the most classical style that I can in terms of the Yang tradition. And so I feel I sort of had to reintroduce this Chansijing concept. In the previous talk, I discussed the Chansijing of the arms. And I remind you, we're being very simple here because I'm only showing you the most internal of the motions. When you actually use the techniques, you have to combine internal motions, by which is meant motions which don't take up space like this, with motions that do take up space. So you have to have those going on at the same time. And it's possible to conceive of the whole form, and in fact all of your movements, as a sort of combination of internal movements and external movements happening at the same time. So Taijiquan can be easily approximated in terms of its form without any consciousness of internal movement. Of course, there is always some internal movement. Every time we walk around, open doorknobs, and do whatever we do, we're doing internal things. But using internal movement in the way it's used as a discipline in Taijiquan is a much more studied and complex matter. Because what we want to do is not only manifest this Chansijing, this internal change, in terms of a sequential function which turns it into a wave, by which I showed you on the arms. For instance, the shoulders might change first, and then the elbow might lift, and then the palm will turn, so that it happens in this sequence, as opposed to some kind of strange-looking, Frankenstein-like looking motion. So this, and by the way, to reiterate, the motion always comes from the center out. That is, the sequence of the motions comes from the center out. Now, I showed you the arms first because, by analogy, it's much more easy to understand the legs. The legs kind of, you'll see, they're a little bit odd in the way they're shaped by comparison. But the arms are very simple. And one of the simple things about the arms is that the rotation of the forearm is 180 degrees. You can put your palm completely up, you can put your palm completely down without moving the elbow in any way. So that's a huge amount of change, whereas the equivalent change in the ankle is extremely limited. So keep that in mind when we switch. Now, I'll just run through the bare essentials of it for a second in the arms. Rotations in, with both parts, are yang rotations, so this would be a double yang rotation of the arm in the sense that the upper arm and the lower arm rotates in. If they both rotate out, then you have yin. If the upper arm rotates out and the lower arm rotates in, you have a position that's usually called an, because it looks like somebody pushing, and that's the word for push. If the reverse happens and the upper part rotates yang and the lower part rotates yin, you have a position like this called peng. Now, we have exactly the analogous movements in the legs with a slight change of terminology, which will be easy to understand when we get there. So at this point, I want to take you into the movements of the legs, but I want to make one thing clear. When we study the movements of the hands and the arms, we're moving them in space. Now, eventually, they're going to be attached to an opponent. In this case, the problem of everything you do becomes much more complex. But the explanation of it is quite simple when there is nothing attached. With the legs, you're always attached, at least with one leg, to the floor. So you always have to consider this as part of your discipline. And I'll explain how that works in a minute. Now we'll extend this principle of Chansijing from the arms to the legs. Now, I told you it would be easier to understand by analogy. So of course, like the arms, the legs have two parts in terms of rotation. The lower part, upper part, lower part. They both have the potential for rotation, the same amount, but in terms of the lower part, the hand can rotate 180 degrees, whereas the total analogous movement in the ankle for the foot is related to the forearm because the foot is at this angle, so it's more like this. In fact, it's what your hand would be if it was at that position. So if the foot were straight, maybe you could do this, but in this current position, it has a very limited degree of freedom, like 10 degrees. So you think, well, why does that matter? And that'll become more obvious later on. But for now, just take my word for it, it does matter, and it matters very much. Now, if we extend this analogy, and I just want to make you familiar with the terminology today. We'll go into actually how all this is used in some other lecture. But right now, I just want you to understand clearly what is the terminology of the Chansijing apparatus. And also, I want one more thing clear, in case I forget, and that is that these positions are described in terms of final position. But when the Chansijing is used, the only thing that matters is the change. That is, there is not any position in terms of Chansijing that is more valuable or powerful or functional than any other position. There are positions that are kind of traditional for certain functions. But even in that case, what matters is the change. In other words, at any particular point in this Chansijing rotation, what matters is that it keeps changing. Any fixed or frozen position is of no use. Now, I can show you examples, pro and con to that, but just take my word for it again. This is its only function, is to change. Now, in the leg, you want the same kind of thing. In other words, you want constant Chansijing changes to be taking place in the legs. And the legs are very different from the arms in the sense that one of them is usually attached to the floor and is making all the action, and the other one is reflecting that action of the body. And so they're used in a very specific way. But again, today I just want to see if I can make it clear how we talk about them. Again, if we rotate both parts of the arm out, we call this a yin rotation. If we rotate both parts of the leg out, which is a yin rotation. Okay? And if we're taking a step with it, we call that a yin step. Now, if we rotate both parts in, we call this a yang rotation of both parts then. Same thing with the legs, and we call this a yang step. It just so happens if you walk in circles, you are always taking a yin step with the foot on the inside and a yang step with the foot on the outside. So you're always executing those two internal changes. So walking in circles builds up your internal movement and internal power, in fact, faster than walking in straight lines. Now, if we take the counter rotations, it becomes more complex. If we rotate one part out, and like the upper part out and the lower part in, we call this the peng movement of the leg. So it does something like this. If we do the opposite, if we rotate the upper part in and the lower part out, this is a an position of the leg. Now when we take steps, these are characterized this way. As I said, yin step, yang step, peng step, and an step. So they're identified by the internal position of the leg as you take them. But again, you're not racing for these final positions. It just means that your body, everything is changing like this. You don't suddenly create this weird shape and then move it like this. Everything in the body is gradually changing in terms of waves of substantial and insubstantial that are going through it. And this is especially important in terms of Chansijing because that's one of the outstanding characteristics of Chansijing is that it allows these waves of change to take place in the finest way possible. And by that I mean with the smallest wavelength and the highest frequency. When I do something like this, that's a wave of change. I mean, one part is moving, it's transmitting force to another part, transmitting force to another part. So these are kind of linear examples of what we call Jing. And this is just simply extreme relaxation so that you can feel and you can transmit kind of impulses from one part of the body to the other. It's called listening Jing. Chansijing is all about rotating, all these rotating things. And Incidentally, we're supposed to be able to listen with your Chansijing as well as expel. But the point is, this allows for a much more sort of gradual and progressive action in the body. You feel like it's starting to turn, and then as it turns, then this turns, and this turns. So you feel like, as one person described it pretty well, it feels like big screws turning in the body. Everything is, each part of your body is turned into a screw of all the 9 parts, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and the center is 9. So now, if we take the form as we do it, the solo form of the Taijiquan, you can sort of characterize these steps very easily in the solo form. For instance, the very first motion is in the classical form, this yin step. When you step out like that, now you can step very far, you can step a little closer, you can step a little bit like this, and if you go finally to what I first learned from Jing, you can just turn the heel like this. And when you do this, it becomes a very easy step to take. But it's sort of the most extreme of the yin steps, in the sense that when it gets to here, if you keep going farther back, now it becomes an on step. But I'll get more into that detail later. But this first move we could call a yin step. And then the next move, here, after we step here and step out, this is a peng step. Because the upper part rotates out, but the foot rotates in, like this. And then, if we make this kind of change into the arrow stance, we discover, if we look down, we have what's called parallel feet. And this is the most classical form. So, a simplified way of showing this is without regard to Chansijing, you might say. Just say, like, put your weight here, lift your knee, stick your foot out, and they would always say, be sure you don't turn the toe out, because that produces a very weak position. Try to go straight ahead. And then turn this toe to the corner, 45 degrees. This is the simplified external description of this. But if we take an internal description, then we have a situation where we're saying, okay, first we take a yin step, and then we take a peng step. Right? This would be described. And then when we do this again, we have this parallel position, because the peng step is not determined externally by like exactly what direction my toe is pointing. It's determined by the fact that I've rotated the lower part in. And then this creates. Now, of course, if I did both, then I would be stepping like this. So again, this is defined. So all the steps in the form can be defined in terms of their internal positions. So if you combine the internal positions of the form in terms of legs and arms, and find every conceivable permutation of this is hundreds and hundreds of permutations, and which you can easily mathematically compute. And so technically you have sort of this enormous amount of variability in terms of the different conditions of the arms and legs. But remember, what is important in terms of these conditions is not the static position they are in, but the direction in which they are changing. In other words, if I had a yang motion of the leg, like this, and I was changing it completely to a yin motion like this, at this point, I would still describe what I'm doing as yin, even though it looks like it's more yang, because it's changing in this direction. So the significant thing about all of these movements is the direction they are changing and their constancy of change. And this is why it's called pulling the silk.